All right, hello everyone. I'm going to do a little demo of installing VirtualBox in your Windows machine. Hey, that's a little better. It figured it out there for a minute. Sorry for the bad video. I am doing this in my office and lighting is not so good, as you can see. So let me share my screen. That way you won't have to see my face. Oh, I've got that shared. That's fine. So let me make that a little small. And what I've done is typed in VirtualBox into a search, and it does come up with, this is the actual website you want, virtualbox.org. It is done by Oracle. And you can go straight to downloads, which is where we want to go. Go straight to the downloads link. I also have a video for installing on Mac OS, and I'll put that out there. The audio on it's a little low, but so if you're running Windows, this is what you want. A lot of people are not familiar with the term hosts. Host means computer or device. And so if you're running a Windows computer, this is what you want to download. The reason they're using the term host is because that will be the host OS for the virtual machines. So Windows is what we want. And you can install it on Windows, Mac OS. So if you have Mac OS, then realize that OS X is the old way, or OS 10 is the old way of saying it. And for some reason, they don't want to change that. I don't know. And different Linux distributions. So select Windows. I've actually already downloaded it. So if I click that, it's going to start the download. And you can see up here, I have downloaded that. So I'm going to open the folder that's in, which is downloads. All right, so there's VirtualBox. Sorry if you can't see that too well. My Windows is skinned. So if you're looking at this and saying, what is this? It's not Windows. It is. It's Windows 10. So I double click the install package. And this is my Windows Surface book. And of course, it wants to make changes. So it's going to say, hey, you're going to allow this to make changes to your hard disk. I'll go ahead and close that. I'll go ahead and close that. While it's deciding to run, it's preparing. All right, and there we are. We're going to be going through the setup. We're basically going to accept the defaults for the setup. Now, you can change this, right? You can say, I don't want you to be on C drive. I want you to be, on some other drive. So it's the same setup, but you really don't need to change any of this up here. Go ahead and say, yeah, go ahead and create the icons. And then at this point, it says, hey, I'm going to reset your networking interfaces because it has to do a little test there. It usually only takes, not even a half a second for it to do that. But your computer may come up and go, hey, you lost internet. Oh, internet's back. So we'll go ahead and let that install, and I will pause this for a moment so that we don't have to sit and wait, but it's going pretty fast. All right, so we've got this message on the screen that's saying, hey, would you like to install this device software? Because it's going to be able to tie into your networking and your USB, so that if you plug in USB, you'll be able to switch that USB over to your virtual machine, whatever it is, if it's a mouse or if it's a storage device. So yeah, we definitely want to do that. All right, so you can see on the screen, the installation is complete, and it says, do you want to start Oracle VirtualBox when we finish? And yeah, that's what I want to do. After all, I'm going to show you how to install a virtual machine inside of VirtualBox. So we'll let that run. It will take a minute on its first run. Okay, so this is what we are left with. You can see here that it's totally empty. We've just got some tools here. And import, export, new, and add. This is really what we're going to be doing over here. And the menus will get you to the exact same stuff. This little penguin over here kind of looks like Tux, the Linux mascot. And I'm sure that's on purpose because they know that VirtualBox mainly is used to give you a guest Linux OS. So I recommend to students that this is what they use when they want to experiment with operating systems. A lot of times I'll have students go, well, I've got this old computer. Should I put Linux on it? Well, you could. It's a lot easier just to use VirtualBox. But we do need to understand really what is going on, what we are going to be doing here. So let me pull this up. All right, here we are. This is basically the process we're following, and we are on step 2. We downloaded and we installed VirtualBox. The next thing we need to do is configure the guest OS settings. In other words, we need to configure the settings that the guest OS will receive and think that that's its computer. On top of that, the other thing that we're doing is providing a way for the guest OS to be installed. So that's also what we're going to be doing during this part, is basically saying, here's where the install information is, or disk is, for the guest OS. And then when we start the guest OS, we'll go through the installation process for that. And so we're breaking it down into those 3 things. We need to understand that those are the 3 things we're doing. Categorize that in your head so that you're able to see what's happening and understand what's happening. All right, so we are going to do a new one. Now, this little new box pops up. Let me put it over here. We need to name it. Now, when we name this, it will pick up on the name and try to do some pre-config stuff for us. None of this really matters. In other words, if I typed in Windows, see how it's selected Microsoft Windows, Linux. So maybe there's some version of Linux out there called Windows, which there isn't. But if there was, I could mistakenly just select this, go forward, and install Linux in it. What this is doing, what this type and version is doing, is trying to set up memory for you, just pre-configure it so that it's there. Try to set up hard disk space, it's there, that kind of stuff. There's no settings that you can't change. There's no like all these little intricate things behind the scenes that you're not aware of. None of that is happening. So it's going to pick up on what you're typing. Let's take a look at what I have. I've got several installs, so let me open up that folder and we'll look at which one I want to install. Of course, for you, you're going to be doing Fedora because that's what the class is using. This is my OneDrive folder that I've got synced. So if I come down here to installs, let's see, we got BOS there. Let's do this by size. That should organize it. There's Kali, Ubuntu, Mac OS, VMware, full. All right, so it looks like if I go off of what I have to install, I am going to install, these are all folders, other things. I'm going to install Ubuntu. That's what I'm going to install. That's the one I'm going to do. You would want to download Fedora unless you got it actually in class. Got it from me in class. So just so that there isn't a little gap missing, if you go to the internet, you can actually just, tell it, I want to install Fedora. And download it. Right, Fedora, that's what they use in the book. So anyway, there's getfedora.org. That is the one. And then this is a Wikipedia page. So let's go straight to download. And what it's going to do is download an ISO file. So ISOs, if you're not familiar with what those are, an ISO is a DVD or CD image. So within Windows and within Mac OS, it will see that as though it's a CD or DVD. And that's exactly what we want. And they even have a media writer here. So in other words, if you wanted to take that ISO image and put it onto a DVD, they have one you can download for Windows or Mac. Now, these different versions, this is a good time to explain this. x86_64, that's the one you want. x86 refers to the old architecture. that we used to use. We haven't used that in quite a while, but if you have some really old computer, it's going to work on that. And then ARM architecture, that's actually for something like a Raspberry Pi, a tablet that's running ARM. You know, all the Mac tablets are ARM, all the Android tablets are ARM, or the Chrome stuff. Most of that is ARM. It doesn't have to be. The Windows tablets are not. You would download this one. I'm not going to download it. I'll just install the other one because the install process is the same. It really is. All you're doing is just selecting, you know, RAM and storage. So I said Ubuntu. Ubuntu, and it's like, oh, there we go. The type is Linux and it's Ubuntu. Now let me just show you. These are all the different types that you can put in. All the different ones. And then once you select one of those types, right, all these different versions that they have pre-set up. Again, you could select Linux, select generic, and you would be okay. They wouldn't put in the proper little icon for you. They wouldn't do the memory settings for you. You'd have to do all that yourself. And then, of course, this is the location of where it's actually going to put the VM itself, where that's actually going to run from. I've got a little room, so I'll just leave that. I'm going to delete this off of this machine because I don't need it on this machine. Hit next, and it says, okay, well, how much memory do you want to use? Notice that this point will be different, right? This is telling me I have 8 gigs, and it's saying, hey, you can give it just a gig and it'll run. That's what it's telling me. Well, that's going to be pretty low, and so I'm going to up that to 2 gigs. This is all changeable later. So you can put this in and then go, oh, I messed that up. That's okay. You can go change it later. So I'll select 2 gigs. This red line is basically telling you, hey, if you go above that, you're really going to slow down your system. So you don't want to do that. This is where, you know, I'll have students say, well, I'm going to get this awesome machine that's going to have 32 gigs of RAM. And I'm like, well, good for you. You'll probably never use it. It's not going to make your machine faster. 32 gigs. Windows uses basically 3.4, 3.5 gigs. So as long as you've got about 6 gigs of RAM, you're going to be good to go. If you got 8, then that's great. If you got 16, then wow, you're probably not going to use that unless you're running VMs. So the more RAM you have, the more VMs you can launch at a time. So, all right, so the hard disk, the recommended size is 10 gigs. It's going to create a virtual hard disk now as I do this. And let's go ahead and hit create. Go ahead and leave this. If you want to make it compatible with a different virtual software, then you can select one of the other ones, but you can always convert it later. So VDI is what they use. That's what I'm going to do because that's what they use. And then dynamically allocate. Now, this is an important thing. Dynamical allocation means I said, go ahead and use 10 gigs. If I let it dynamically allocate, it'll just fill it up and expand it up to 10 gigs. So the guest OS will see a 10 gig hard drive and it'll see how much that's full. The host OS, Windows 10 in this case, it will just see that it's not a 10 gig file, it's only as big as it currently is. Now that's really good because it takes up less space on your hard disk. However, if it's a VM that you're going to use all the time, for instance, lots of times people will install Linux and then they'll install Windows in a VM inside of Linux. And they're going to use Windows all the time for those software incompatibilities that they have. I got to run this program, that type of thing. And when that happens, well, you're going to use it up all the time. So just say it's fixed. What that'll do is in the host OS, it'll go in and say, this is a 10 gig file. And it's blocked out and there's no problem. The reason why it could be a problem later is that if you're doing a lot of other stuff on your computer, you don't have a lot of hard disk space like this one doesn't. I could say dynamically allocate, be installing stuff into my guest OS, and then it go give me some weird error, basically saying, hey, you're out of disk space, right? In the guest OS, you look and you're like, I have tons of disk space. Yeah, but the host OS is, you know, the one that has the disk in reality is full. And so you have to think about how you want that set up. All right, so there it is. Notice it came back here, file location and size. There's the 10 gig file right? So now I get to slide that back and forth if I want a larger hard disk space. And this is where it's actually going to put it. That's the location, and you can change that. You can change that location. I'm going to go ahead and hit create. At that point, see, it's done. It's ready to go, except for the fact that if we try to launch it right now, it really won't know what to do. And that's because I haven't told it where the install files are. That's an important part of this. So once you get to this point, you're almost there, but you don't want to click start yet. Any of these can jump you to the settings that you need. This settings button opens up a screen where you can get to this information. So I'll just open up the screen and we'll see all that same information. And here's the general stuff. I can go to system. I can change the base memory. This is the boot order. So as the fake machine starts up, what is the boot process? So I can say, you know what, there's no floppy. You don't need that. I'm going to take that floppy and move it down and turn it off. Right? I'm not going to boot to network, but I do want you to check the optical and then the hard disk. This machine doesn't have an optical drive, by the way, but that's what it's going to, tell it. And we'll leave the rest. We'll leave the rest as standard. You can check the processor, so this one's got 4 CPUs. I can actually give it 2 CPUs, the guest OS, and still have 2 for my own use. I'll leave it as 1. And then the execution cap. This is a cool thing that you can do. In other words, you could give it all 4 CPUs and then give the execution cap a much lower number here. Now, what does that mean? That means that if I say out of this CPU, what can you use as far as processing power? There's the definition there. It gets 100% of that CPU. So it can just ramp it up and use that one CPU to 100%, meaning that your host OS is not going to be using that CPU when that happens. Or you could say, well, I'll give it 2, but you can only execute 50% of those, leaving the other 50% for the host OS. That's what that's referring to. So that's kind of cool. And then you got some acceleration, which normally is on. You can change some display properties. See, this has got 16 megs. I'm actually going to leave that, but basically, if you know what kind of graphics card you have, on most systems, you can up it to 128, which is beneficial for the guest OS to just say, you know what, I'm going to use 128. I'll actually just leave it. I'll leave it down there a ways. You can change how many monitors will report there, and then what kind of graphics controller. And we're going to leave that default, but we're going to enable 3D acceleration. 3D acceleration has been a part of graphics processors forever, right? Not forever, but for a very long time. So yours should be able to do that. So I usually change this. Like on most ones I run, I up it to 128 because I probably have a gig at least on my graphics card. So that's not really taking too much. In this case, since it's just something I'm going to delete later, I'll leave that. Here's the important one. Here is the important one, storage. Right now, as I said, if we tried to start our guest OS, our install process, it doesn't know where to go. There's nothing saying, get this and do this with it. So right here on this empty DVD, I'm going to say, I want you to get a file. Notice it says it's this IDE device, but again, this doesn't even have a DVD drive. So I'm going to tell it, I want to choose a disk file. A disk file is an ISO. This one would be, I actually have the option to create this virtual disk file. So I'm going to go and choose what I had there. So here's Ubuntu. What is that? That's my folder, right? I don't want that. So that's not my install. I come down here to my OneDrive. I come down to installs. In other words, it's probably in your download folder, right? That's where you put that. And then there's all the other folders. Oh, look, I do have a Fedora workstation. Let me go ahead and select Fedora. Now I'll select Ubuntu. It doesn't really matter. My little title would say Ubuntu, but it would be Fedora, but I can change that later. And actually, yeah, let's just do Fedora there. We'll hit open. And now this is set to go look at this file instead. And our boot process, right back here in system, it's going to check that first. So let's see if this works. We're going to OK that. And now we're going to start this. That will pop up a little screen and show us what's happening for this particular VM. All right, I paused it for a minute because it takes this machine a while, but there it is. And notice how tiny this is. Well, that's because it is a default old school screen resolution. So this is like 640 by 480. And it says start right there. So if I click inside this window, I need to make sure I click in there. And then it'll tell you this, hey, now this is important to remember. I usually say don't show this again, but if you haven't memorized this, you probably want it to come up all the time. When you're dealing with a guest OS inside that host OS, your mouse pointer will disappear inside of the guest OS. Most of these new operating systems, I shouldn't say that because it's not really the operating system that really has that issue. Anything new, VirtualBox can deal with moving the pointer in and out with no problem. But they're telling you, hey, if you can't get that out, you're going to have to click the right control key to get that out. Otherwise, you won't be able to, right? See, look at that. It's like disappearing. So they're giving me some information about how this is going to work. And you can see, barely you can see. Let me change the view. You still have menus, and we're going to do scale mode. I like scale mode. Switch it because I can. Scale mode means that I can drag this, and it will just try to scale it correctly. It doesn't mean it will. All right, so it's looking at the live. It's taking a look at what it's doing. Each guest OS is going to have a different kind of install process. I'm going to actually hit escape to abort the check and just continue because I don't want to wait. And, you know, it's like, hey, media check was aborted. And then we should start into the OS. This will take it a minute. You can see it going there. This is the way Linux looks. Almost every Linux version will look like this. If they don't, they'll have a nice, pretty splash screen, but they hide. This is what's happening behind the scenes. So it's going to take a minute, so I'll pause it. All right, so this has finally started up. This process really is dependent on how fast your computer is, how fast it can, you know, load it into RAM and all that. But usually it's pretty fast because you're not actually accessing a DVD. You're actually accessing a file. All right, so basically, Fedora has started up and it's like, hey, you can just try it, which actually it's already running. Fedora is running here already. So we can try it. This window will disappear and we can mess around with it. That doesn't save anything, right? If you just say, I want to try it, it's not going to save anything because it thinks it's coming off of a DVD. We're going to install it. That's the whole point. So we're going to go to that point, hit install. Now we're into installing the guest OS. So up to this point, all as we've been doing is setting up that space where we can install it and actually launching the DVD file so that now we're to where we can install it. And again, this will, you know, it usually doesn't take too long, but it will take time depending on how many processors you gave it, what kind of RAM, and then how fast is your processor to begin with. If your machine is like 7 years old, right, it's going to take longer than a brand new computer. So again, I'm going to pause this because this machine is not the most high powered. As a matter of fact, there may be problems with my video glitching out a little bit. Oh, I don't have to pause it. Here we are. So English, US, continue. Notice I can move the mouse in and out. So it knows how to do it. It says the hard, well, that's not nice. That should, okay, it came up. It's like, okay. We need to deal with this installation destination, and that should be the one. There we are. All right, so at this point, it's got that checked, and every install is different. So if you were to do an Ubuntu, the screens are not going to look the same. They do their own install. But notice down here, it's like storage configuration. If you really want to mess with stuff, go to advanced and custom. Otherwise, they have made it easy enough to just say automatic. Let's go ahead and move forward. I don't even know if 10 gigs is good enough for Fedora, right? I selected Ubuntu, and now I'm installing Fedora. So it's like not nice. It's like I don't like that. As a matter of fact, that's probably my issue, is it probably does not have enough space. Oh, it finally figured it out. That's good. So we'll begin the install, and there you go. From there on, you're just waiting for the install to get done, answering any prompts that it might have. At the end, what's going to happen on pretty much any distribution of Linux or anything is going to come up and say, what do you want the user ID to be, and what do you want the password to be? So think hard about that. Make it easy, right? If you're going to keep it, then yeah, later on you can change it to make it more secure. But lots of times people will forget what that is, and then they have to go out and research, how do I reset a password in Fedora when I can't get into Fedora or whatever it happens to be. This is really it. I'm going to pause it though, because at the end of it, what I want to show you is that you can now, once it's installed, take that DVD out, right? Take the file reference out and say, don't go there anymore because you don't need it. So we'll let this install, and then I'll show you how to do that. And it's a done deal. All right, so the last thing that you want to do is tell it that that DVD is no longer there. So once you finish the install process, just like any install process, it's going to go, hey, I need to restart, and it'll go ahead and restart. And normally an operating system will know my install DVD is still in. I'm not going to go to that. So it doesn't do a full restart, right? It's not going through post and stuff. It just restarts the OS. On any system, right? If you tell it to go to a DVD, you left your DVD in, it's going to try to start the install process again. And so you have to be very aware of what it's telling you at the end of whatever OS you're installing. If it says, I'm done installing, please remove the DVD, then that means when you go ahead and say, yes, I removed the DVD and it's shutting down, you need to basically power off that VM and then come into the settings and take the DVD out. Otherwise, what'll happen is it'll try to start the install process again. And I'll have students that do get confused at that. It'll come up and it'll go, huh, it came up the same way it did the first time. I guess I need to install it again. And they go through the install process again, and they do it again, and they do it again. And about the fourth time, they're like, this isn't working for me. Right. So pay attention to what the screen's telling you. Eject the DVD is usually what it says, because it knows if your machine is set to load from the DVD on a standard computer with a DVD drive, it's going to do that every single time until you take the DVD out. Well, we don't have a physical one, so we have to come into settings, and we have to go tell it, hey, there's no physical disk here. I am now going to tell you, don't go here, right? Right there it says Fedora Workstation Live. That's my install disk. And I'm going to say, no, remove that disk. And now it's empty. I don't need to actually remove the DVD because I might install something else later, right? So now I say okay to that. And now I can start it up, and it will start up the way it's supposed to start up. It'll boot into the OS, and I'll have to log in. Now, a couple of other things you need to know is when you're installing something, notice this says powered off. I'm going to double click it, and that'll start it. Or I could click start. So we'll let it kind of start, but then I want to show you the options you have for saving the machine state. That's, again, that warning about your capturing of your device. Notice it says it's trying to start that. Okay, now let me go ahead and hit close on this. Now what it says here is I can save the machine state or I can power off the machine. And if the OS has loaded, if it had actually loaded, I would be able to select send the shutdown signal. So instead of shutting down inside the OS, I could actually just click that button and it would set that send that shutdown signal, and it would shut down. There really isn't a reason to turn off these VMs unless you're having some kind of glitchy problem, just like on a Windows machine. So I will just tell it to save the machine state. What that means is it's going to pop up right where it left off and continue whatever it was doing. This is normally what you want to do. So normally you're just going to click the X on the window and then save the machine state. Now, of course, this hasn't booted fully, and if it did boot fully, then you would actually see the menus at the top, and you could select it off of there too, either one. So if I hit save the machine state, now this says it's saved. See, it says I've saved. And there's things that you cannot do if it's saved. So there's things in settings that will not allow you to change things if it's in a saved state. Right? It's not letting me do anything. In order to change these settings, you have to power off the VM, which makes sense, right? You're not going to have your machine on and then go put more RAM in it, right? You're going to turn it all off. Same with the hard disk, right? So that's the way it's behaving. If you save the machine state, then you have to go ahead and tell it to either start up and then shut it down properly or discard it. Discard it means I'm not going to remember that state and I'm going to have to boot up again. You can, I mean, seriously, if you save the machine state, you could be writing a document halfway through, say, save that state, and then go back into it and it's right where you left off. There's always a little danger in that, but normally there's no issue. Now, the other thing is that you can actually create a clone. So you can actually clone that. That'll take up space on your hard drive. And you can actually, if I can find it here, take a snapshot. And I may have to be off to do that. So let's discard it. A snapshot, let's go into, yeah, that's just the tools. Let's go to our preferences. That's just, yeah, that's not what I need. Someplace in here, it's got the ability to snapshot what you've done, and I cannot find that. It's probably staring me right in the face. You're like, it's right there, McBride, it's right there. There's close, tools. Oh, there's snapshots. Under tools is snapshots. You can take a snapshot. And that is really, really, really nice to do when you have a very clean install. So in other words, you've just installed it, you know everything's working right. You go ahead and you shut down that VM, and then you go and create a snapshot. That was under tools, so it should have been, I should have been able to see it there. And when you take a snapshot, right, you can say, this is clean install. And then if anything happens, you can actually boot back to this clean install. It's a fantastic feature. In other words, you go through stuff and you're like, wow, I really messed that up. I'm going to have to reinstall my whole Ubuntu or my whole Fedora over again. Well, if you made a clean snapshot, right, I did that right at the beginning, then you can actually come back here and say, okay, I'm going to go back to this point and restore that right here. Boom, it restores, and you boot up and it's like, oh, I just installed this. It's a very nice feature that all virtual drive, virtual OS managers do, or hypervisors as they're called. All right, so that's the end of the install process instructions. If you have any questions, let me know.